I just finished the Unholy Consult, the final book in R. Scott Bakker's Aspect Emperor series, and the latest release in the overall Second Apocalypse series. This series has taken me as many as 6 months to read in totality, which is a shocking number in retrospect, but then I really shouldn't be shocked. This series has consumed my life, and for good reasons. Alongside George R. R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire, I think Bakker's book series is probably among the most formative series I have read in terms of how I see fiction. As an aspiring author, this means that it has a profound influence on how I want to write my own stories. It's just a shame that I'm not nearly as skilled as Bakker is in so many respects. But I can try. I've been working on the first arc of my own epic fantasy series for years now, inspired by the political intrigue of Martin, the long-term story structure of One Piece, and the abrasive characterization of Abercrombie. I started this series with all those influences explicitly in mind. I'm now working on the 4th draft of this first arc, and also as I record this, I'm actually wrapping things up. And I had started Bakker during the editing process. Even still, Bakker is likely going to have a monstrous impact on my own writing, especially for the long-term story of my series. A Song of Ice and Fire has an apocalyptic storyline, but it wasn't until I read Bakker that I got over my prejudice against storylines like that, and decided to incorporate one into the long-term story of my series. My series, because of Martin, has its horrific aspects, but it wasn't until I read Bakker that I heard the term epic horror fantasy and realized that I really wanted to lean into that label. But these are the minor influences. Most of all, Bakker taught me the ways in which I can lean into philosophy, especially metaphysics, and use it to explore interesting ideas regarding consciousness and free will and morality. I have always had an interest in philosophy, and I've always put some of that thinking in my books, yet there were still numerous ways in which I was avoiding doing certain things with my story because I thought the philosophy might be too dense, or that it might not work for the story. Not anymore. Bakker has shown both the possibilities and perhaps some of the things I might want to avoid, as I try to make my story more philosophical. And somehow, Bakker taught me just how far I could take the fucked up elements in my stories. And this is after Martin taught me that exact same lesson. Bakker's books are probably the darkest and most depraved books I have ever read, and it never feels shoehorned or inserted in for pure shock value, at least to me. Maybe people just have different thresholds. Either way, Bakker pushed me in ways that I have not been before, and I indulged in experience every step of the way. The Second Apocalypse was a challenging read. I don't think it is perfect, and I might even have a fair amount of criticisms, but my overall experience is overwhelmingly positive. The Unholy Consult caps off Bakker's love story, and it ramps up the depravity and degeneracy to a horrid degree. One scathing single-star review described the first 30% as, quote, super gross and repetitive gay snuff porn, unquote. And, yeah, kinda. Except Bakker makes you want it to happen. Every page of the story unfolds in a powerfully natural way, especially with the darkest moments. I think those first moments of the story are my favorite because of the way it portrays the culmination of what has been building for the last book. We left off with the ordeal only becoming more and more consumed by the effects of the swank meat, and the unconsensual homosexual cannibal murder sequence is neatly brought forth. As usual, it's not just what happens, but the way in which it happens. Bakker has an unparalleled ability to present these sequences in a way that is so unsettling and also beautiful in the debauched way that Bakker's violence consistently is. Continuing from this, there is another way in which this plotline develops that I did not see coming, and it also provides a culmination to a character arc that is so satisfying from a storytelling perspective. This is also the development that I know pissed off many people in a good way. Some readers talked about how they had to put down the book at this point, or even wanted to hurl the book across the room because their connection to this character was so profound. That says all you need to know about its power. Before I move on to the ending, I'm thinking I will touch upon the prose, as that is worth talking about in the wake of the commentary I provided in the last review. As I talked about, I think my two biggest problems with Bakker are 1, the density of his prose, and 2, the abuse of abstract descriptions with little to no concrete grounding to make sense of what is going on. The first is somewhat ambiguous with regards to what is too much, and the more I think about it, I think the biggest problem is the second point. The Great Ordeal leans into these problems, proving the book to be the most difficult to read and understand. Thankfully, I think that Bakker's writing is nowhere near as confusing in The Unholy Consult. Where The Great Ordeal had climactic scenes playing out in ways that left me baffled, and in all the wrong ways, I barely had that feeling in this book. And Bakker still managed to keep the philosophical scenes ever present in this story without falling into this trap. I don't know if this was Bakker improving on his perceived mistakes in The Great Ordeal, or he just had a different intent in mind for these scenes. Either way, I thought there was improvement in this sense at least, according to my standards. In the previous books, I was questioning the point of the White Luck Warrior storyline. I thought the storyline felt shoehorned in, and I did not like how the storyline seemed to wrap up in The Great Ordeal, especially. Unfortunately, I don't think that sentiment really changed for this book. I did not despise what ended up happening, but I did not like it either. The final battle in this book is as amazing as any of Bakker's battles. We get an extended fight sequence with the book's namesake, and it hits you with the intensity and brutality almost every step of the way. Bakker's ability to synthesize the omniscient perspectives with the more grounded ones to provide the full experience of the battle is quite simply amazing. While reading The Great Ordeal, I remember wondering if Bakker was failing to include enough third-person limited in his battles, but I never got that feeling in this book. One small thing that I did find a bit cringy was the Gamergate dragon who fought one of the main characters. It was described as such by one of Bakker's fans in a YouTube comment section. I thought the scene was a bit ham-fisted and cringy. Now, I'm a dude, and I also thought the I am no man scene from Lord of the Rings was too on the nose as well, but nowhere near as bad. So maybe this is just me? Someone mentioned that this might just be Bakker overcompensating in response to the accusations of misogyny that he's gotten. The speaker dismissed this, but it really does feel like overcompensation. While I did criticize the female characters in the very first book, I never really cared to malign Bakker's character in the process. I'm not eager to do that now either. What matters is that I thought the story lost some of the cool factor because of this. I just thought it was cringy. Among the best parts involves the revelations during Kellis's confrontation with the consult. Obviously, I can't get into any specifics, but you can rest assured that this will likely be the biggest section in the spoiler part of this review. Bakker develops the story in ways that loosely connects to some of the philosophizing that I did in The Great Ordeal. It is also what seems to be the first step in some respects, with so much more ripe and ready to be unpacked in the later series. And there is also a plot twist that I did not catch, but seems so obvious in retrospect, the best ones. Partly this is because of my expectations, and these almost left me disappointed. Thankfully, Bakker carried through the implications of this twist in ways that made me know this had to happen and was totally worth it. There are two other plot twists that happened around the same time as the above one that are also both very well done and compelling. As usual, I can't really say anything else without seriously spoiling things, so I have to leave it there. When I read the last line of The Unholy Consult, I was immediately satisfied. I know that others actually took a while to come around, and they had to mull over the story and even reread sections, but I never had to do that. Part of it might be due to the fact that I always look ahead and know how many pages I have left, without spoiling myself, right? I didn't actually read any of that section, I just knew when it ended. In contrast, many others have talked about how they read that last page, turned to the next, and saw that the rest of the book is just appendices, right? The other part is the fact that I love unhappy endings when they fit the story. And finally, I know there is more to the story overall, another series. As for that last bit, I am both satisfied and eager for more with regards to where the story stands now. The Unholy Consult is the perfect ending. The only reason I want more, aside from the general desire to read more Bakker, is to get more discussion on Bakker's metaphysics. The Unholy Consult, as I mentioned, spins the world building in interesting ways, but I still have questions. I don't need every detail filled in, but there are certain elements that seem obviously ripe for development. Finally, I think there might be a number of different nitpicks. True to my characterization, they don't really matter for enjoyment, and they might even be explained in the third series, but they are still worth mentioning. Unfortunately, that will have to wait for the spoiler section. This should be it for the non-spoiler section. Overall, I love the book. I think it beats out The Warrior Prophet, which was my previous favorite in the Second Apocalypse series. I think I will give it a 9 out of 10.